Hey, you watching! Have you ever wanted to see your own original characters animated like this? Or maybe illustrated like this? Actually, I usually draw a bit cartoonier, so probably more like this. Anyway, if so, then subscribe to PopCross, because starting in 2019, I'm going to be taking some subscribers' original characters and animating and illustrating them right on this channel. To submit artwork, new and old subscribers should join the PopCross community Facebook group, where everyone can share artwork, give each other feedback, and vote on what characters are going to be animated or illustrated during the community character episodes. But for now, let's go to the illustration part of this video. Cut to live action. What is up, everybody? Christian Pearson here of PopCross Animations, and it is the holliest, jolliest time of the year, at least when I'm recording this and when the video is going out. And because of that, I thought I'd make some art inspired by the holiday season. And also inspired by one of my favorite comic stories of all time, Klaus. If you're not familiar with it, it's a sort of gritty origin story for Santa Claus, written by Morrison with art by the absolutely outstanding Mora Chavez. And I'm gonna try and do a piece inspired by his work in this. But I think Santa Claus gets enough love this time of year, so I'm gonna do a piece of Mrs. Claus. Make her into some kind of badass action hero. Maybe even try and work in a bit of Dan Mora's style into my own piece. Let's see how this goes. First things first, of course, doing some thumbnail sketches and getting an idea of what I want the composition to be, and, you know, her pose and everything, and if I wanted her fighting a big dude or some small dudes, and I like the idea of her defending the North Pole while Santa's out delivering presents. Then I did some really quick rough drawings of what I wanted Mrs. Claus's costume to be like, based off of some drawings that Dan Mora had done, and she ended up just looking kind of like a female version of Klaus, but with some furry shoulders, which I knew I wanted right off the bat. Then I was into the rough drawing, and in this case I only ended up doing one layer of rough drawings, unlike that Spider-Man piece, because this one had a lot fewer characters to manage, and a lot of them looked pretty similar. The only character that looks different is Mrs. Claus. All the little minion guys look pretty much the same, and I could kind of just scribble them out. The swords she's holding were something that I was thinking about a lot today. I couldn't come up with a good weapon for Mrs. Claus. I mean, I'm a really big fan of just a giant buster sword like what Cloud Strife has in Final Fantasy, but that didn't really seem right for Mrs. Claus. And then I thought about maybe a bow staff or something, but that seemed a bit boring. I considered some big, like, goofy candy cane kind of weapon, but that seemed a little bit more cartoony than I was going for. So what you'll end up seeing I end up doing in this video is she's got two kind of like really big scimitar type swords, which are those curved swords, and then I just put a bit of candy cane coloring on them just to give it a little bit of that candy cane touch, but without making it too cartoony. And you can see now that we're in the inking stage, I'm doing things a lot more cross-hatchy than I usually do. And I think I actually end up doing more cross-hatching than Dan Mora would. He is pretty subtle with his cross-hatching, and his stuff is just so great. I really recommend all his work. I actually didn't even know there was a sequel to Klaus, and now there's actually a third volume coming out. The first issue of it just came out, and I got the second one, and I'm gonna read that over the Christmas break. But you're not here to listen to me talk about how great Dan Mora is, you're here to listen to me talk about what I'm doing with my artwork. With the skeleton icy minion guys, I ended up trying out a different brush to ink them with, which I never really do, but this whole video is kind of about me experimenting with different styles. It was supposed to be kind of like Dan Mora's style. Didn't end up so much like his stuff, but at least it was something different. You can see I'm also just kind of doing some really rough shading in with the brush that I'm using. I end up fading that all together later because it doesn't really work with the rest of the piece eventually, but again, I'm glad I tried it. Then I got to the flatting stage, and I had a pretty good idea of what colors I wanted everything to be. Obviously, in my last two videos, I've had actual reference images to work from, but with this one, it's kind of just, you know, Mrs. Claus. She's usually wearing red, and then gave her fur a little bit of a yellowish hue because I knew everything else was going to be pretty blue, and I wanted Mrs. Claus to stand out from everyone else. I ended up doing a lot of the flatting by hand, which I'm not really used to because I can usually just fill bucket in the colors, but with scratchier ink, that's harder to do. And I gotta say, it helped me realize why coloring books are so popular. It's a pretty soothing process. Anyway, this is what I got done by the end of the first night. So with a project like this that requires a bit more rendering and time, it can be really good to take an hour or even a day away from it and then come back with fresh eyes, because then you can kind of see the things that aren't really working that you might not have noticed if you did it all in one go. So with this piece specifically, I'm not loving the purple sky. The background in general needs work, which makes sense because it's the thing I've spent the least time rendering so far, but I don't like how my eye is being drawn up to the moon because of the contrast between it and the purple sky. And I really want people to focus on Mrs. Claus the most, and the canyon kind of going down to her helps with that, but also the fact that she's the only one that's got red on her.
You got red on you.
So if I change the sky to be more blue like everything else, then it'll really hit home the idea that everyone's supposed to be focusing on Mrs. Claus. So let's change up that sky and get to rendering the background. Once I changed up the sky color, I started to really see this piece coming together, and I got a lot more confident about how it was going, and rendering in the background helped even more. And I think the thing I'm happiest with in this piece is the composition, which is funny because that's the very first thing I decided on in doing the thumbnail sketches. But in a way, the whole thing kind of feels like an explosion. And what I mean is, everything goes straight down to Mrs. Claus and then breaks out. Like your eye starts at the top, goes straight down to her, and then splits out into looking at all four of the different minions surrounding her. And that's one of the reasons I really think people need to spend more time on their thumbnail sketches, because the composition can really make an image work or not work. If you spend hours rendering an image with a bad composition, it's not going to be a great piece. But even if you're not that great at rendering, if you've got a good composition, the piece will at least be pretty appealing to look at because of the shape of it all. Anyway, that's my composition rant, I'll shut up about that. I actually had a lot of fun rendering out this castle and mountain in the background. I did it in a way that I wouldn't usually do. I did it a lot rougher. I just used one brush and I kind of just stroked in some light layers, made the brush a bit smaller, then did a bit more detail, then made it smaller, a bit more detail, and obviously it didn't get that detailed. I wanted it in the background and almost as if it was faded out, which I think really worked. I'm glad I didn't end up putting an inked outline around it. I mean, there was kind of one in the same brush that I used for the ice minions, but I really kind of faded it out and got rid of parts of it. And I also lightened it up to be as if the moon was kind of reflecting on it, which I also end up doing a bit to some of the ice minions and to Mrs. Claus later on in the piece. I think I could have done better with this, but I'm pretty happy with how the ice guys turned out in terms of actually kind of looking like ice. Earlier in the piece, I wasn't so sure it was going to work out, but later on, once I start adding a bit more of rim lighting to them, they really start to come across as being icy. You might not have noticed this in the background earlier, but I had a video up by Trent Kenayuga, who's an awesome illustrator who has a YouTube channel you should check out. And he did this drawing of this super cool ice monster that I watched years ago, which is actually what got me to subscribe to his channel, and I was kind of using that as a reference to try and make a good ice texture on those ice minions in this piece. Also, obviously, I had to change up that nose. The one I had in there was not working at all. I don't know what I was thinking. This one works much better. There are some things about her face that I wish I'd changed. I think I made her chin a little bit too big, but I guess that's up to preference. Anyway, now I've got some of the rim lighting going, and I always think that just ties a whole piece together and makes it really pop out and look that much nicer. Ah, I love rim lighting, even when it doesn't make sense. There are probably artists that would flame me for doing it, but I just love some rim lighting, even when there's no light in the piece that would actually be causing the rim lighting. Anyway, this is the final product. But then I was also a little bit unsure about it, so I added this version as well. It's funny, I actually asked a few different people which version they liked better, and I got a bunch of different answers. I mean, obviously there's only two pieces, so there could only be two answers, but, you know, I got a few people saying they like this one better, a few people saying they like this one better. I think in the end, now that I've taken a step back from it, I like this one better, but I do tend to lean towards colder images, like I like blue more than I like orange and yellow. The upside of this one is obviously your eye is forced a little bit more to looking at Mrs. Claus because that's the biggest point of contrast from everything else. But the red also kind of doesn't make much sense. I mean, my rim lighting usually doesn't make sense either, but that's really kind of like, what is that? What is this fiery part there? Whereas this one, it all kind of just looks a little bit more natural. Like, There's no big random fire thrown into it. Overall, I'm quite happy with this piece. When I initially finished it, I wasn't. I actually recorded a different ending where I was saying that I wasn't too happy with it, but looking back at it, I think it's pretty cool looking. I mean, you can kind of tell that I'm not working in my natural style. There are some things like the background castle I don't think quite works with the rest of the piece. It's a little bit too obviously in a different style from the rest of it. But overall, happy with this. And I think I'm gonna try this style again in the near future. Or in the future, maybe not the near future. Also, remember everybody to join the PopCross community Facebook page. Thanks so much to everyone who started following me this year. It was a great year for PopCross animations. Next week's video is probably just going to be an update video because I'm going on vacation, so I don't have time to do a full video. Sorry about that, but big things are coming in 2019. Big things. It's going to be a great year. All right, everybody. Happy holidays and goodbye.